Hey guys, welcome to my channel. You might notice that I have my entire look complete right now, but the only thing that is missing is that I have not done my brows yet. So today we are getting back to the basics when it comes to brows. You've probably watched a YouTube video before where they're doing a complete tutorial and then they say, okay, and now I'm gonna go off camera and do my brows. Yes, a lot of them have a separate video on how to do a brow tutorial, but a lot of times it's how to do their brows. So they're showing you a tutorial on how they do their brows every day. So I wanted to do something a little different. I wanted to give you more information so that if your brows are different than mine, maybe you have blonde brows or you have really full brows or you have hardly any hair at all. I wanted you to be able to follow this and it still pick up tips and tricks even though your brows are different than mine. So I wanted this to be very informational. Yes, I am going to show you how I do my brows, but I wanted this to be super informational so you feel after watching this that you picked up some tips and tricks, whether you're going for a super natural brow or a more bold brow. So first I'm going to talk about color choice. So the rule of thumb is that if you have lighter, blonder hair, you can go a little bit darker with your brow color. And if you have dark hair, you can go a little bit lighter. Yes, some people like to match exactly on, but you kind of have that leeway where you can go a little bit darker if you have blonde hair, a little bit lighter if you have dark hair. And there's some people who have super blonde hair and then they have really dark, bold brows, and that is totally fine and awesome too. I think I love that look personally. But if you're going for your most natural looking brow and trying to find that perfect color that looks, you know, you want it to look like your brows are just awesome, that you don't have color on them, then that's kind of the rule of thumb, is that if you have blonde hair, you can go a little bit darker, and if you have darker hair, you can go a little bit lighter. So my hair is basically, it's very, very dark brown, almost looks black on camera, and the color I'm going to be using is a pretty deep brown. It's not black by any means. If I did black, it would look very harsh, I would say, on my face. So I go a little bit lighter than my actual hair color. So let's talk about formula. We know when you go to Sephora that there are so many different types of formulas when it comes to brows. We have powder, we have gels, pencils, pomades. So how do you decide what to use? So it is a personal preference for sure, but I'm going to give you some tips and tricks on how to pick based on, you know, what your brows look like or what kind of look you're wanting to go for or what your artistry level is. So first of all, the look you're trying to go for, if you're wanting a super natural brow, gels are always nice because you just brush them over your brow and it just enhances the brow that you already have. They also have products out there that have some volumizing fibers in there. We have like Benefit, Gimme Brow, Hourglass just came out with a new one. There's one from Dior that has some volumizing fibers, so those are really nice because they're very low maintenance, but they do give a really nice look to the brow for just how low maintenance they are. So if you're going for super natural, putting gels on are really nice. If you're going for, you know, a little bit more definition, you can go to the powder category or the pencil category. And with powders and pencils, you can do it really natural. You can also build it up and do a more defined brow. And then if you're wanting a more defined or like an Instagram looking brow, then you can maybe go to those pomades where they're a little more intense. You can make pomades look natural, but it's not as easy to make them look natural. They tend to look a little bit more bold on their own. So now if you, based on what your hairs are, if you don't have any hair on your brow, you don't really want to go in with a gel because there's no hair for it to pick up. So if you have very little hair, you know, using a pencil is going to be really nice because you can get those really hair-like strokes. So Anastasia has the brow definer and the shape of it is kind of like a triangle. So what's really nice about that is the tip of the triangle you can use to get those like hair-like strokes. And then the places where maybe you don't need as much precision, you can use the base of it and just fill it in. There's a lot of pencils that are really thin, so like the Anastasia Brow Wiz. Those are excellent if you're doing detail work. I wouldn't call them realistic if you are going to be using them to fill in your entire brow every day. There's not a lot of product in it because it's so thin, so the brow, like something like the brow definer would be a better option for you. But if you have really great full brows and you just have a little section that has kind of like a little bald spot and you just use it every day to fill in a couple hairs to really make them look detailed, then the brow would be a good option for you. And if you have very little hair, a pomade is very nice because you can really draw them on and you can make them look quite bold, and it doesn't really matter if you have hair for it to stick on because it'll stick nicely to just your skin. So now let's talk about your level of like makeup artistry and what you've worked with before, and if you've ever done your brows. If you've never done your brows before, I would not start with a pomade. It is very hard, if you've never done it before, to make it look super natural. So I would say a powder is really good for a beginner if you're wanting to try that look of a more defined brow. Pencils are always good as well, but just keeping in mind that if you see someone on YouTube where like, I'm gonna use the Anastasia Dip Brow, and they're doing their brow and it looks amazing, and I love that product so much. You can very much get an awesome look with it. But if you've never done your brows before, I probably wouldn't recommend going straight towards Dip Brow because it's going to be really hard to get that more natural look, and it has a learning curve. Once you've kind of worked yourself up and worked with other brow products, then definitely go in with the Dip Brow, and just know that you start in with a really light hand, and then you can kind of see where you need to build or how much product you need on your brush. But also take into consideration like where you are in your brow journey, because some products are a little easier to use than others. So now we're going to talk a little bit about shape. So to do that, I'm actually going to start with my brow. So I'm using the Benefit Ka-Brow. So this is very, very similar to Anastasia Dip Brow. The reason I'm using this today is because I want you to really be able to see what I'm doing. So I use this when I'm kind of going for a little bit more of a bold look, but for today, I really want you to see what I'm doing with my brows. So I want something that's really going to show up. So what I do when I use something like this or something like the Anastasia Dip Brow is that I get just a little bit. I get a very little bit from the actual tub, and then I go into the back, like in the cap, and I really work it into the brush. You need very little of a product like this because it is so pigmented, which is also a really nice thing about a product like this, is that it really lasts you a very long time because you're only using such a little bit. So once I get my brush saturated, I'm actually going to show you how to find your perfect shape. So what's really nice about this is what I'm about to do is customizable to any face shape, any brow shape. So what this is doing is this is meant to give you your perfect shape. So me doing this on me is going to look different from you doing it on you, but using this technique is really going to help you get that perfect shape. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be mapping the brow out. We're going to map out where the brow starts, we're going to map out where the arch is, and we're going to map out where the brow ends. So because my brushes has the product on it, I'm just going to use it for marking purposes. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to place it up against my nose right in the center and go straight up. And that is going to show me where my brow should start. So I'm going to make a mark. So you can see the mark, and that is showing me where my brow should start. So the next thing I'm going to do is I am going to place the brush right at the same place, but now I'm going to be finding my arch. So when I find my arch, I want to look straight ahead, and I am going to angle this through my iris. So like the edge of the iris. So you see I'm taking this line through the edge of my iris. And anchoring it towards your nose is what's going to really ensure that you're always getting that perfect shape for your face shape. So I'm just going to go through, and then I'm going to mark. You can see the mark, it's very faint, but I also already did my makeup, so I don't want the mark to be too crazy. And then the last thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna find where my brow ends. So I'm gonna do the same thing, and I'm gonna angle it through the outside of my eye. So it's going to graze this outside of my eye, and that'll show me where my brow ends. All right, so we have the point where my brow begins, we have where my arch is, and we have where it ends. Now you'll probably notice that where I marked is actually where my brow ends and where my brow begins, because when planning out my brow and like plucking and just getting my overall shape, that's kind of how I have found my shape. So what's great about this is going to be good for if you have no brows. This is going to be good for if you already have a brow shape. This is going to be good for if you're super, have really full brows. This is going to work for anyone. Now, this is a guideline. This is not a hard, fast rule. So some people find that their brows start much farther out and they have a lot of space here. If you're going to do this rule and start them in, it's going to look totally crazy to you. Yes, technically it might be that perfect shape for you, but it might feel a little overwhelming to bring your brows in so far in when you're so used to them being far out. But this is a good guideline. Maybe you bring them in just a little bit and kind of get used to that, and maybe you work up to where your shape is actually supposed to be. But there's no rule. If you're like, no, I kind of like my arch a little farther out or a little closer in, that's okay too. But this gives you a really good idea of, what shape works for your face. So once I find my shape, I know where I'm going to start my brow, I know where I'm going to end it, and I know where my point of my arch is going to be. So we're now going to fill in. So when I am doing anyone's brow, when I'm working with anyone and I'm doing their brow, I like to personally line the bottom, line the top, and then I fill in. So I am going to do short strokes and just line the bottom. And for me, I'm following my own shape because I've worked on my shape. But let's say, like, I've worked with teenage girls who have never plucked their brows and they have these beautiful, gorgeous, like full brows, but they want a little bit of an arch. So I will take this second point that we did that really helped us find our arch, and I will give a little arch there. And yes, there will be some hairs left over because they have never plucked. But by defining that brow and defining that arch, those hairs almost go away. And you can actually cover them up with a concealer, but it also gives them a good idea of if they were to ever pluck their brows, where would be a good place to pluck so you're not over plucking. So I am just following my shape, but I know I'm going up towards where my, where it marked for my arch. I am gonna fill this in a little bit so that the arch is exactly where that space was. And then once I get to that point, I'm going to start going down. And I'm gonna end right where that point ended. So I have my bottom shape done. So now I'm gonna work on the top. For me, I think the bottom can be a little bit more defined, but when you start if you want a more natural look, I wouldn't go too strong on the top. The top can be a little more feathery, unless you're going for that like carved out brow where they put the concealer on the top, concealer on the bottom, and that's more like the Instagram brow, well, kind of the old Instagram brow, because I think feathery brows are really in right now. But I am gonna still define the top. I'm just gonna be a little softer. So you see it's a little bit softer. It's not so dark as I did the bottom. So once I got that top, I started to fill in. It's just second nature for me once I have the top to start filling in. So when I'm filling in, I'm being very light with it because the top and the bottom was where I got that definition. So now that I'm just filling in, I'm going to be very light with it. And when I fill in the inner part right here, so you see how I've already filled this in, but you see a little blank space, I want to be so soft. So your outer part of your brow can be a little bit more defined, but the inner part, if you want a natural look, you want it to be a little bit softer. So if you're very heavy in the front, it can look like you're almost like angry. So you want it to be a little softer. So I'm going to just lightly brush up. And it's actually a little heavier than what I want, but mostly because of that mark I did. So I'm gonna soften it up and I'll show you how I'm gonna do that. So when doing a brow, your best friend is a spoolie. So this brush and this brush that I'm using is a Tarte brow brush, has a spoolie on the end, and a spoolie is a must-have because right now I'm looking at my brows and I like the shape and everything, but I want them a little softer, especially in the front. So I take my spoolie and I brush through them. It's a great way to soften it and make it just look more natural. So if you ever feel like you did your brows and you're like, oh no, I've gone too far, it's too heavy, I don't know what to do, just try using a spoolie before you take it all off and start over, and that will really help soften it. So that is that. I'm gonna just tidy up just a little bit. That's my brow, and you see that it's lighter than my hair. My hair is definitely darker than my brow, but I'm going for a little more of a natural look. So then another tip that I love that I think is key for anyone is putting on a brow gel. Now the product I'm using is waterproof. It by no means needs any really longer wear, which is usually what you use a gel for. But what I like a gel for is that it brings the brow hairs kind of to the surface. So especially when you're using a product like this, it kind of like mats them down and you can look drawn on. Whereas when I use a brow gel, it's going to bring the hairs to the surface and give me like a more natural look and look like my brows just look the way they do. So I'm using the Anastasia Clear Brow Gel, one of my favorites. And no real tip to this. I do, say brush up because then that gives you that, the feathery look with your brows. But it really makes the brow hairs just come forward and look more natural. It's a step that I can't go without. So that is that. So then you do the exact same thing on the other side. You can, when you're doing your markings, you can mark everything out at the same time. So you have all your marks and then going in and filling. And I think just something important to remember when you're doing your brows, like, from looking from one test side to the other. Everyone says it, that your brows are sisters, not twins. Sometimes it might feel annoying because you're like, no, I want them to be twins. I want them to look exactly the same. But you are probably the only one that notices that, unless it's something like completely off. But when I look in the mirror, I see, and I don't think my brows are exactly perfect because my brows are just different anyways. But don't get too hung up on making them exactly the same because you're either going to get super frustrated or you're going to be adding more here and then more here and more here, and then you get away from the look that you were trying to create in the beginning. So yeah, so that is how you fill your brow in. I am going to do the other brow off camera, but obviously this brow we showed you lots of detail in, and then we're just gonna finish up the video. All right, so now that I have both of my brows complete, while I was doing this other brow, I was thinking about, how long it took me to do the first brow and how I was mapping it out and showing you in detail, and how this brow took me a minute and a half, like super quick. So when you're watching this, you're probably thinking, oh my gosh, I can't work this into my schedule. Like it's gonna take me 30 minutes to do my brows. It might take that the first time, and there's nothing wrong with that because you're learning, you're trying to get your shape right. Try it on a day that you don't have to go to work or you have the day off, so you take that time to really practice. Every day that you're gonna do it, it's gonna go quicker, it's gonna become easier. So don't think that it's going to be this huge process and you know, once you start and like try to teach yourself and work at it, you'll get better and better at it and it'll become second nature. I do not map out my brow. I can't even remember the last time I mapped out my brow until today because I know my shape, and you will eventually know your shape from doing it over and over again. The other thing I want you to remember is that if you've never filled in your brows and you follow this tutorial and you do it for the first time, it is gonna look shocking to you. The brows frame the entire face, so when you first get them filled in or when you first get them waxed or anything that changes your brows, when you first see yourself, you're going to feel, it's gonna feel weird. It's gonna look totally different to you. I want you to keep it on. Keep staring at yourself in the mirror throughout the whole day. Keep looking at yourself. By the end of the day, you're gonna love it. If you've done it right and you didn't go too crazy and you followed this and it's super natural, you're going to eventually fall in love with it. So keep that in mind. I don't want you to try it once and then be totally turned off from it, because kind of let it settle in because you'll get used to it and then you won't be able to live without it. That's what happened to me. So that is the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned a lot. I hope this was the type of video that, different people who have different brow colors, different types of brows, different levels of artistry feel like they can get some tips and tricks from. So thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe to my channel and I'll see you guys in the next one.